Let's talk about parameters. A parameter is essentially a variable, but it's a variable that's declared at the top or in the header of a procedure or a function declaration. Okay. Now, the job of a parameter generically is to store information, but the thing is, with procedures in MySQL, parameters can store data. Parameters can pass data back to the statement that called it in the first place. And parameters can also uh, do both. That a parameter can pass information, can receive information, can also pass information back to the calling statement. Whereas with functions, parameters can only take in information. Okay. Um, so what I have here is the same database that's been used or we have been using in the previous meetings, and in fact, this is the same version of that database that was used from the previous meeting. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the first example. Okay, so what I have here is essentially a pretty straightforward procedure. It gets the course name, given the course code. So this is the parameter. So I decided to call it course code. It's an in parameter. That's the mode. Okay, in MySQL that is called the mode, and so its job is to take in information. So when I use it, okay, effectively this argument, this data, this string is stored into the parameter. Um, and then it gets used, the parameter's value is used in the select statement. Okay, select CNAME from courses or C code, so on and so forth. Now, so what's happening here is that when I have the call get course name, okay, the argument, which is the string ADODR, I'm sorry, not ADODREA, WP. Okay, I'm trying to learn how to write again. WPHTML. Okay, so that's the argument, and that's stored internally into the course code parameter. So this is an in parameter, so that's why it can store the information, and then internally in the procedure, the value of that parameter gets used. So this is what's called an in parameter because its job is to store data. It's to receive the data from the calling statement. The calling statement passed this argument. So I repeat, this is the argument. This is what's called the argument. Okay, that's the string. That's the value. That's the data that's passed to the procedure at the time it's called. And the argument is stored into this in parameter, which is called the course code. So going back to the code, so that's what's happening here, and that's how the procedure gets this information, so to speak, from the outside world. Kind of like the coin that you insert into the vending machine, that slot, or rather the box where your coin ends up, that's like the parameter in that vending machine. Its job is to store the coins that are inserted into the machine when it's used. Okay. All right. So well, let me run all of these, and as expected, we're gonna get the course name, which is HTML. Okay. So if I typed ADO DREA, and I'm just gonna run this line. Okay. All right, so as expected, we're going to get the course name, which is Advanced Dreamweaver. So that's all in good. So what about the other modes? Well, let's take a look at next example. So here I have a much, I guess, longer maybe, but it's not that all more complex than the first example. But nevertheless, it's the get contact info procedure. So in here I have three parameters, namely student ID, email ad, and phone num. Okay, so let's oops. Well, actually, that's the one of the references that I used. Let me switch back to this. And in fact, let me go back. So student ID, email, add, phone num. So student ID, email, add, and phone num. So we have student ID. Let's put here email, add, and then phone num. Phone num. Okay. All right. So this is an in parameter. So in other words, data can flow into it. Okay. Let's correct that arrow. Email add goes upwards because it's an out parameter. Phone number goes upwards because it's an out parameter. So some parameters can be both in out. So in fact, in the mode, you'll just type in out, as in the two words with no spaces in between. Um, so if we go back again to the code, all right, so those are our three parameters. And looking over here in our select statement, okay, so I have here select s email, comma s phone. So I'm selecting these fields from the students table, but I want the value of these two columns of my result to end up into these parameters. That's why I have the into. So whatever the value of this will go into this parameter, whatever the value of this will go into this parameter. So think of it as if I didn't have this line, it's gonna get us, okay, we're given the condition here where SID equals student ID. So it's gonna get us the email address and phone number of a student, one student, and I want, so now if we add this back into the picture, imagine that whatever the email and phone number are, I want the email to end up into this parameter, to be stored in that parameter, and then the phone to be stored in this parameter. And in doing so, because these are out parameters, I can then access those values from the calling statement. So if we look at this statement which says call get contact info 400 800, which is the student ID, and then there's at E and at P. Well, these are user-defined variables. Okay, now um, these are also variables, and in fact, we can create variables also inside the procedure by using the declare statement. But these are user defined variables that sit outside of the procedure. But nevertheless, they are variables. Okay, and variables generically in programming are used for storing data. So, if you will, what's happening here? Let me go back to my little whiteboard. So what's happening here is that the 400 800 that gets stored into the student ID. Now the at E that I have is not stored. It's not like I'm storing the value of the at E, the E variable, into email add. If there's anything, what I'm doing, because this is an out parameter, the value of this parameter is then passed on to this E variable, and the same thing goes for um, the P variable. So whatever the value phone num is stored into that at P. Okay. So when I run this statement, this is passed. Okay, this is passed to the procedure. These variables are also passed to the procedure, but because they are mapped to these out parameters, what the procedure will do, so to speak, is it's going to store the value, it's going to copy the value of these variables, these parameters, into these variables, okay, respectively, of course. And then finally, I have a select statement here that simply shows the contents of these two variables. So let's run everything. All right, so let's execute all. All right, so the objective is to find the email address and phone number of this student, and there you go. So we have at E containing the email address and the at P containing the phone number. So that this example illustrates, let me close this. This illustrates the out parameter. Mind you though that if I were to add an in-out parameter, this will say, let's say if email add was an in-out parameter, it would have been like this. Okay, but I want it as an out parameter, and There you go. Okay. So procedures compared to functions, if you recall, cannot return values. I mean, cannot return a value. But the cool thing is procedures have the ability to have out or in-out parameters, and you can have as many. Like in this case, I have two. So in other words, compared to functions, procedures can uh, output or sort of, so to speak, return multiple values, whereas functions can only return one. Okay, so that's another sort of technical difference between the two. So nevertheless, here are examples of parameters being used in procedures.